I was sitting at my kitchen table Wednesday morning, doing what I always do with my first cup of coffee, checking messages on my phone while the morning light slanted through the window onto yesterday's crossword puzzle. At 63, I'd developed certain rituals that kept my days orderly. Coffee first, messages second, then the news if I felt brave enough. The text from Daniel had come in at 6:43 a.m., which struck me as odd. My son wasn't what you'd call an early riser. The preview showed a video attachment with a thumbnail of what looked like money, crisp bills spread across a surface. For a moment, I wondered if he was showing off some unexpected windfall. Daniel had been struggling financially since his divorce 2 years ago, working odd jobs and asking for the occasional loan. I tapped play. The video started shaky, like he was holding his phone with one hand. I could see stacks of $20 bills arranged on what looked like a hotel room bed, the kind with the generic floral comforter you see in chain motels. Daniel's voice came through clearly. Last batch moved clean, ready for the next transfer Friday. The camera panned slightly, and I caught sight of papers scattered near the money. My heart did something funny when I glimpsed my own name on what looked like bank documents. "She's perfect for this," Daniel continued, and his voice held that confident tone he'd had as a teenager when he thought he was being clever. "No one suspects a sweet old lady. Hell, she doesn't even balance her own checkbook half the time." The camera moved again, focusing on the papers. There was my signature, or something that looked very much like it, next to dollar amounts that made my coffee cup rattle against the saucer when I set it down. Next drop is Friday night. Same account, same process. She'll never know the difference. The video ended. I sat there for a long moment, listening to the kitchen clock tick and watching a robin hop across the back deck. My hands felt steady, which surprised me. Inside, though, something had shifted, like when you're walking downstairs in the dark and think there's one more step than there actually is. I played the video again, and once more after that. By the third viewing, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to call Daniel immediately, wasn't going to demand explanations or throw accusations around like an angry mother. If he thought I was still in the dark about whatever this was, maybe I could find out exactly how deep it went. After all, I'd taught 8th grade math for 32 years before retirement. I knew something about gathering evidence before drawing conclusions. I just never thought I'd need to investigate my own son. Before we continue, please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and subscribe to Never Too Old channel. We're creating a community of incredible people who know that our best chapters can happen at any age. Now, back to the story. The first thing I did was walk to my little desk in the corner of the living room and pull out the shoebox where I kept my bank statements. Harold used to handle all this business when he was alive, but the past 4 years had taught me to pay attention to numbers in ways I'd never bothered with before. I spread the last 6 months of statements across the dining room table like I was grading papers. The afternoon sun made everything sharp and clear through the west window, the kind of light that doesn't let you ignore details. There they were. Deposits I'd noticed before but never questioned closely. They came in with labels like client refund and rebate processing, amounts ranging from $3,000 to $8,000, appearing every few weeks. I'd asked Daniel about them once or twice, and he'd mentioned something about a side business helping people with online returns. It had sounded plausible enough at the time. Now I took my reading glasses from the chain around my neck and looked more carefully. The deposits were always under $10,000, always. You spend enough years watching teenagers try to cheat on tests, you learn to recognize patterns, and this was definitely a pattern. What made my stomach drop, though, were the withdrawals. Transfers I didn't remember making, all processed electronically, all under that same $10,000 threshold. The dates matched up with the deposits, usually within a day or two, money coming in, money going out. Like my account was nothing more than a highway rest stop. I found the magnifying glass Harold used to use for his stamp collection and examined the signatures on the few paper transactions. They looked like mine mostly, close enough that a bank teller wouldn't question them, but the R in my last name had a little flourish I'd never made, and my middle initial was slightly different than how I actually wrote it. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Daniel. "Morning, Mom. Hope you're having a good day. Love you." I stared at those words for a long while. Then I set the phone face down and went back to the statements. The most recent deposit had come from something called Northside Distribution LLC in Cleveland. I'd never heard of it, never been to Cleveland, never ordered anything that would warrant a refund from Ohio, but there it was, $4,800, deposited last Tuesday. The transfer out had happened the next day. Same amount, minus a $50 processing fee that stayed in my account. I got up and made myself a peanut butter sandwich the way I always did when I needed to think. Standing at the kitchen counter, looking out at my neighbor's vegetable garden next door, I tried to remember what I'd been doing last Tuesday. Grocery shopping, lunch with my friend Margaret, a normal Tuesday. Certainly not authorizing a $5,000 transaction I knew nothing about. When I went back to the dining room, I noticed something else in the statements I'd missed before. Every deposit came with a reference number, and those numbers followed a sequence, like someone was keeping very careful track of a very organized operation. The most recent reference number was 127, which meant this had been going on for quite some time. I picked up my phone and scrolled through Daniel's recent messages, all cheerful, all normal, all lies, apparently. Outside, the mail truck rumbled down Maple Street, and I heard the neighbor's dog start barking at it the way he did every day at 2. Some things, at least, were still predictable. I waited until Thursday afternoon to call Daniel. Long enough that it wouldn't seem connected to that accidental video, but not so long that he'd wonder why I hadn't been in touch. I'd learned that kind of timing from managing classroom dynamics. Sometimes the most important thing is when you don't say something. He answered on the second ring. "Hey Mom, what's up?" "Oh, nothing much." I was sitting at the kitchen table with my checkbook open in front of me, though I wasn't actually balancing it. Props, I suppose you'd call them. I got one of those alert emails from the bank yesterday about a deposit. Was that you doing something for me? The pause was so brief I almost missed it. Which deposit? Tuesday, I think it was. Few $1,000s from some company in Ohio. I kept my voice light, mildly curious, the way you'd ask about a package that showed up unexpectedly. "Oh, that." His voice warmed up, became confident again. "Yeah, remember I told you about that return service I've been doing? That was a refund from a bulk purchase that got canceled. The company processes them through my clients' accounts to avoid their own transaction fees." It sounded reasonable. It sounded exactly like the kind of complicated business arrangement that would make my eyes glaze over if he explained it in person, which I realized was probably the point. "Well, that's handy," I said, "though I don't remember buying anything that expensive." "You didn't. It's just a processing thing. The money doesn't really come from you. It just goes through your account temporarily." He was talking faster now, the way he used to when explaining why he'd missed curfew. I should have mentioned it, but you know how you are with complicated financial stuff. There it was, the gentle insult wrapped in affection designed to make me feel foolish for asking questions. It had worked for 35 years. Today, it just made me mad. "Well, keep them coming," I said, forcing a little laugh. "At my age, every little bit helps." "Love you, Mom. Talk soon." After he hung up, I sat there looking at the phone for a while. Then I got up and walked to the front window where I could see the street. A perfectly ordinary Thursday afternoon on Maple Street. Kids riding bikes, someone trimming hedges 2 houses down, the mail carrier making his rounds. Everything normal except the fact that my son had just lied to me with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing it for a long time. My phone buzzed with a text. From Daniel. "Don't mention that deposit to anyone, okay? The business arrangement is kind of unofficial and I don't want to complicate things with the IRS." I read it twice, then set the phone down and went to make myself a cup of tea. When you've spent decades recognizing when students are trying to manipulate you, you develop certain instincts. And right now, every instinct I had was telling me that my son was in much deeper trouble than I'd imagined. Friday morning, I baked banana bread. It had been Harold's favorite, and Daniel's too, once upon a time. The smell filled the kitchen and drifted through the house, the kind of domestic comfort that made everything feel normal for a little while. I wrapped the still warm loaf in aluminum foil and drove over to Daniel's apartment. He lived in one of those converted Victorian houses on the other side of town, the kind where the landlord had carved up a beautiful old home into 4 small units and painted everything beige. Daniel's was on the first floor with a separate entrance through what used to be a side porch. His car was in the driveway, a Honda that had seen better years but was clean and well-maintained. Whatever else Daniel was involved in, he wasn't flashing obvious wealth around the neighborhood. I knocked on the door, holding the foil-wrapped bread like a peace offering. "Mom?" Daniel opened the door wearing jeans and a t-shirt, his hair still damp from a shower. "What are you doing here?" "Banana bread," I said, holding up the loaf. "I made too much and thought you might like some." His smile looked genuine enough. "That's sweet. Come on in." The apartment was small but tidy. A couch facing a television, a dining table with 2 chairs, a kitchen visible through an archway. Everything looked perfectly ordinary, except for the expensive laptop open on the dining table and the phone that kept buzzing with incoming messages. "Coffee?" he asked, glancing at the phone again. "That would be nice." He disappeared into the kitchen and I could hear him rattling around with mugs and the coffee maker. I walked over to look at the framed photos on a bookshelf, Daniel and his ex-wife at their wedding, Daniel and me at his college graduation, a picture of Harold holding baby Daniel. The phone on the table buzzed again. Daniel called from the kitchen. "Mom, could you grab that for me? If it's important, just let me know." I picked up the phone, intending to call out the caller's name, but what I saw made me freeze. The caller ID just said M. I set the phone back down without answering and moved to the window, pretending to look out at the street. My hands were shaking slightly, so I clasped them behind my back. The phone rang again. This time Daniel came out of the kitchen, drying his hands on a dish towel. "Sorry," he said, picking up the phone. "I need to take this," he answered without looking at the caller ID. "Yeah?" I stayed by the window, focusing on a neighbor's cat picking its way across the wet grass. But I could hear every word Daniel said. "Yeah, the warehouse on North Side, Friday night." His voice was quiet, businesslike. "She's in for this batch, too. Same amount as last time." My reflection in the window looked pale, wide-eyed. I picked up one of the picture frames and stared at it intently, as if I were deeply absorbed in studying Harold's face. "No. Everything's clean on this end? She doesn't suspect anything." A pause. "Yeah, I'm sure. Same as always." The coffee maker beeped in the kitchen. Daniel wrapped up the call quickly. "Right, see you tonight." When he came back into the living room, he was smiling again, that easy, familiar smile that had gotten him out of trouble since he was 5 years old. "Sorry about that. Work stuff." He set a mug of coffee down on the table near where I was standing. "How's the coffee?" I turned from the window and picked up the mug, grateful to have something to do with my hands. "Perfect, thank you." We chatted for another 15 minutes about safe topics, the weather, my neighbor's new fence, a book I was reading, normal mother and son conversation. The whole time, Daniel's phone kept buzzing with text messages and I could see him fighting the urge to check them. When I finally left, I drove around the block twice before going home, just to make sure I wasn't being followed. Which seemed ridiculous, but nothing felt quite real anymore. Back in my kitchen, I sat down with a notepad and wrote down everything I could remember from that phone call. Warehouse on North Side. Friday night, same amount as last time. North Side. The same word from that company in Cleveland, North Side Distribution, LLC. I stared at those words until they started to look strange and foreign. Then I tore the page from the notepad and tucked it into my purse next to my grocery list and the receipt from the gas station. Some secrets I was learning have a weight to them. And this one was getting heavier by the hour. I called Daniel Saturday morning and suggested lunch. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told him, "about helping your business more. Maybe we could talk about it over sandwiches." "Sure, Mom, that sounds great." His voice had that pleased tone he used when he thought things were going his way. "How about that place by the river, noon?" The Riverside Cafe sat on a deck overlooking the water, with picnic tables under blue umbrellas and the smell of fried fish drifting from the kitchen. Daniel was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with his back to the water. He stood up to hug me, and I noticed something glinting under the sleeve of his button-down shirt. "You look good," I said, settling into the chair across from him. "Is that a new watch?" He glanced down and tugged his sleeve, but not before I caught a glimpse of silver and what looked like diamonds around the face. Oh, this old thing? It was a gift from a friend. Must be a good friend. I opened my menu, though I already knew what I wanted. Expensive taste? Yeah, well. Daniel shrugged, suddenly focused on studying the lunch specials. Some people are generous. We ordered Turkey Club for me, fish and chips for him, and made small talk about the weather and the boats passing by on the river. Normal conversation, except for the way he kept checking his phone, and the fact that his old watch probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. When the waitress brought our food, I leaned forward slightly. "So tell me more about this business of yours, the return service. It sounds complicated, but if there's a way I can help..." Daniel's face brightened. "It's not that complicated, really. Just time-consuming." He picked up a French fry, gestured with it as he talked. "See? Companies get stuck with returned merchandise they can't resell through normal channels. So they sell it in bulk to liquidators, who then sell it to people like me. And then you resell it? Sometimes. Or I help the original companies process refunds to avoid taking the loss on their books. It's all legitimate, just creative accounting." He was good at this, I had to admit. The explanation sounded plausible, delivered with just the right amount of enthusiasm and casual expertise. If I hadn't seen that video, hadn't traced those bank transactions, I might have believed him. "And that's where my account comes in?" "Right. Sometimes the refund amounts are too large for my personal accounts to handle, so I use family accounts temporarily, just for processing." He took a bite of fish, chewed thoughtfully. "The money's never really gone, Mom. It just moves through different accounts to avoid triggering automatic audits." "Audits?" "Yeah, banks have to report certain transactions to the government. Anything over $10,000 gets flagged automatically, so we keep everything under that threshold." There it was. He'd just described money laundering to me like it was a perfectly reasonable business practice, and he'd done it while eating fish and chips on a sunny Saturday afternoon, as if he were explaining how to change a tire. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked. "Nothing you need to worry about. Usually just a few thousand at a time." Daniel reached across the table and patted my hand. "I really appreciate you being so understanding about all this, Mom. Not everyone would be so trusting." I looked down at his hand covering mine. No wedding ring anymore, but there was a thin band on his pinky that I'd never seen before. Gold with some kind of stone. Another gift from a friend, probably. "I just want to help if I can," I said. "You've been through a rough time since the divorce. Things are turning around, though. This business is really taking off." He glanced around the restaurant, then leaned closer. "Between you and me, I'm looking at buying a house soon. Something with a little more space." A house? With what money, I wondered. His apartment rent couldn't be more than $800 a month, and he'd been asking me for grocery money as recently as last spring. "That's wonderful, honey. Where are you looking?" "Nothing definite yet, but there's this place up on Highland Avenue." He trailed off, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "Anyway, nothing's decided. Highland Avenue, where the houses started at $500,000 and went up from there." We finished lunch talking about safer topics, but I kept noticing things. The way he paid the check with cash, pulling a thick roll of bills from his pocket. The casual way he tipped the waitress $20 on a $30 meal. The expensive sunglasses he put on when we walked outside. Small things that added up to a picture I didn't like. After he left, I sat in my car in the parking lot and called Margaret. She answered on the first ring, the way she always did. "Ruth, how was lunch with Daniel?" "Educational," I said. "Are you free this afternoon? I think I need to talk to someone." Margaret lived in a tidy ranch house on the quiet side of town, the kind of place where the lawn was always perfectly edged and the mailbox got a fresh coat of paint every spring. She'd been the manager at First National Bank for 27 years before retirement, and if anyone would know what I was looking at, it would be her. She met me at the door with a pot of coffee already brewing, and that concerned expression she'd worn the day I'd called to tell her Harold had died. "You sounded rattled on the phone," she said, leading me to her kitchen table. "What's going on?" I pulled out the bank statements I'd brought and spread them across her table the same way I'd done at home. "I need you to look at something. Tell me what you see." Margaret put on her reading glasses and leaned forward, her finger tracing the deposit and withdrawal patterns. She was quiet for a long time, occasionally making small humming sounds that meant she was thinking. "Ruth," she said finally, "where did you get these?" "They're mine. My account." Her head snapped up. "These are your transactions?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." I told her about the video, about Daniel's explanations, about the phone call I'd overheard. Margaret listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and rubbed her forehead. "Oh, honey, this is bad." "How bad?" "This is classic money laundering. See these amounts?" She pointed to the deposits. "Always under $10,000 to avoid federal reporting requirements. And look at the timing. Money in, money out, usually within 24 hours. Your account is being used as a pass-through." My coffee had gone cold in my hands. What does that mean for me? Legally, if the authorities find out, you're implicated. Banks are required to report suspicious activity, and this pattern would definitely qualify. Margaret leaned forward. "They wouldn't care that you didn't know about it. Your signature is on the account, your name is on the transactions." "But I didn't sign those transfers. I never authorized." "Can you prove that?" "Because someone who has access to your account information did authorize them, and unless you reported them as fraudulent when they happened—" I hadn't, of course. I'd noticed the deposits and been grateful for them. I'd noticed the withdrawals and assumed I was forgetting things, the way Harold used to forget he'd written checks near the end. What should I do? Margaret was quiet for a moment, turning her coffee mug in small circles on the table. "You need proof that you weren't a willing participant. Documentation that shows you discovered this recently and tried to stop it." "How do I do that?" "Start with your bank. Request detailed records going back at least a year. Ask for copies of all authorization documents. If Daniel forged your signature or used electronic access without your knowledge, there might be a trail." She paused. "But you have to be careful about how you do this." "What do you mean?" "Think about it, Ruth. If Daniel is involved with people who move this kind of money, and he realizes you're investigating—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The afternoon light slanted through Margaret's kitchen window, making patterns on the table between us. Outside, a neighbor was mowing his lawn, the sound distant and normal. Everything felt normal except the conversation we were having. "You think he'd hurt me?" "I think desperate people do desperate things. And if there's as much money involved as these statements suggest—" Margaret gathered the papers into a neat stack. "You have to be careful. If he realizes you know, you could be in danger too." I drove home slowly, taking the long way through the residential streets where families were having barbecues and children were riding bikes on sidewalks. Normal Saturday afternoon life, while I carried a folder full of evidence that my son was a criminal. Back in my kitchen, I made a list of what I needed to do. Bank records, documentation, proof that I was a victim, not an accomplice, and I needed to do all of it without Daniel knowing what I was up to. The hardest part, though, was the knowledge that Margaret was right. The man I'd raised, the boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers, might actually be dangerous now. Some truths, I was learning, have teeth. Sunday evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the bank statements spread out again, making notes on a legal pad, when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Through the window, I could see Daniel walking up the front path, moving with that quick, purposeful stride that meant he wanted something. I swept the statements into a pile and shoved them under the morning newspaper just as the doorbell rang. "Mom?" Daniel called through the door. "It's me." I opened the door to find him slightly out of breath, car keys still in his hand. "Daniel, this is a surprise." "Hey, sorry to drop by unannounced, but I was in the neighborhood and I need to run a quick deposit through your account. Is that okay?" He was already moving past me into the house, heading for the kitchen where my laptop usually sat on the counter. Tonight, thankfully, it was closed. Oh, I said, following him. Actually, I was just heading out. Margaret called and she needs help with something. This'll just take a minute. Daniel was looking around the kitchen, taking in details I'd never seen him notice before. Where's your laptop? I put it away. And really, I should get going. Margaret sounded upset. But instead of leaving, Daniel sat down at the kitchen table. What's wrong with Margaret? I'm not sure. She just said she needed company. I stayed standing, hoping he'd take the hint. Maybe we could do the deposit thing tomorrow? It's kind of time sensitive. Daniel's gaze had fallen on the corner of the newspaper where a few lines of the bank statement were visible underneath. What's that? My heart did something uncomfortable. What's what? He leaned forward and lifted the edge of the newspaper. I moved quickly, putting my hand down on the paper. Just bills. Nothing interesting. Bills? Daniel's eyes met mine, and for a moment we just looked at each other. Mom, those look like bank statements. Well, yes, I pay bills from my bank account. I tried to keep my voice light, even though my pulse was racing. Revolutionary concept. Daniel didn't smile at the joke. Instead, he sat back in his chair and studied my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. You're not starting to ask questions, are you? The question hung in the air between us like something sharp and dangerous. Outside, a dog was barking somewhere down the street, and I could hear the distant sound of a television from my neighbor's house. Normal Sunday evening sounds that felt very far away. Questions about what? I asked. Daniel continued to stare at me for what felt like a very long time but was probably only a few seconds. Then his expression softened back into that familiar, easy smile. Nothing, Mom. I just worry about you sometimes, you know? All alone in this big house, overthinking things. He stood up and moved toward me. You'd tell me if something was bothering you, right? Of course. He kissed my cheek. The same casual goodbye gesture he'd been making since he was tall enough to reach my face without standing on his toes. But this time, his hand rested on my shoulder a moment longer than usual. I'll call you tomorrow about that deposit, he said. Enjoy your evening with Margaret. After he left, I waited until I heard his car back out of the driveway and disappear down Maple Street before I moved the newspaper and looked at the bank statements again. My hands were shaking slightly as I gathered them up and took them to my bedroom, where I locked them in the small safe Harold had installed in our closet years ago. I called Margaret to let her know I was using her as an alibi, in case Daniel checked. He just left, I told her, and I think he suspects something. What makes you say that? I described the visit, the way he'd looked at the bank statements, that question he'd asked. Margaret was quiet for a long time after I finished. Ruth, she said finally, I think you need to move faster on this than we discussed. If he's getting suspicious, I know. And maybe you should consider staying somewhere else for a few days, just until you can get to the bank and start the documentation process. I looked around my bedroom, at the wedding photo on Harold's dresser, at the familiar pattern of the wallpaper I'd chosen myself 15 years ago. The idea of leaving my own home because I was afraid of my own son seemed impossible. But then I remembered the way Daniel had stared at me, the weight of his hand on my shoulder, and the careful way he'd asked that question. Maybe impossible was exactly what this situation had become. Monday morning, I called Margaret before I lost my nerve. I want to do what we talked about. Set something up that will give us proof. Are you sure? After what happened yesterday? Especially after what happened yesterday. I was sitting in my kitchen with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He's getting suspicious, which means he's going to be more careful. If I'm going to catch him, it has to be now. Margaret was quiet for a moment. All right. I have a contact at the bank who can help us set up a monitored account. But Ruth, once we do this, there's no going back. If Daniel realizes what's happening, I know. We spent the next hour working out the details. Margaret would arrange for a special account that would track every transaction, every access, every electronic signature. Then I would offer Daniel a significant amount of money, enough to make him careless. How much are we talking about? Margaret asked. 15,000. I'll tell him I want to help him clear his debts so he can get that house he mentioned. That's a lot of money to risk, Ruth. It's not really at risk. If he tries to launder it, we'll have proof. If he doesn't, I paused. Well, then maybe I'm wrong about all this. But I wasn't wrong. I knew it the way I'd known which students were cheating before I ever caught them at it. By Wednesday afternoon, everything was in place. I called Daniel and used the voice I'd perfected over 30 years of motherhood, the one that mixed concern with just the right amount of guilt. I've been thinking about what you said at lunch, about money being tight, about wanting to buy a house. I paused for effect. I'd like to help. Mom, you don't need to. I want to. Your father left me more than I need, and what's the point of having it if I can't help my own son? I took a breath. $15,000, enough to clear whatever debts you have and give you a good start on that house. The silence on the other end lasted just long enough to confirm what I already knew. Daniel needed money badly. That's incredibly generous, he said finally, but I couldn't take that much from you. You're not taking it. I'm giving it. We could meet tomorrow, maybe at that coffee place downtown. I'll have everything ready. Are you sure about this? Completely sure. Thursday morning, I sat in Corner Coffee with an envelope in my purse and my phone recording everything just in case. The envelope contained $15,000 in marked bills. Margaret's contact had been very thorough. Every serial number was logged, every bill photographed. Daniel arrived exactly on time, looking more nervous than I'd seen him in years. He kept glancing toward the door, checking his phone, drumming his fingers on the small round table. You seem distracted, I said, sliding the envelope across to him. Just work stuff. He picked up the envelope without looking inside it. Mom, I can't tell you how much this means to me. You don't have to pay it back right away. Take your time, get yourself settled. I watched his face carefully. Just promise me you'll use it wisely. Of course. Daniel was scanning the coffee shop again, his attention divided. This will really help with some cash flow issues I've been having. I nodded, waiting to see what he'd do with the money. Margaret's contact had explained that we needed Daniel to actually use the marked bills in his operation for them to be traceable evidence. We were finishing our coffee when the door chimed and a man walked in. I wouldn't have paid attention to him normally, middle-aged, wearing jeans and a dark jacket, the kind of person you see in coffee shops every day. But Daniel's entire body went rigid when he saw him. The man looked directly at our table, made brief eye contact with Daniel, and nodded once. Then he walked to the counter, ordered something, and left without ever speaking to us or acknowledging that he knew Daniel at all. But Daniel had gone pale, and his hands were shaking slightly when he picked up his coffee cup. Friend of yours? I asked. What? No, never seen him before. Daniel stood up abruptly. I really do need to go, Mom. Thanks again for this. He held up the envelope. I'll call you later about the deposit. After he left, I sat there for another 10 minutes, thinking about that brief exchange. The man had known exactly where to look when he came in, had made that deliberate eye contact, had left as soon as his message, whatever it was, had been delivered. When I finally got up to leave, I noticed the man's car still in the parking lot, a black sedan with tinted windows, engine running. As I walked to my own car, I could see a figure in the driver's seat, watching me. I drove home, taking a deliberately complicated route, checking my rearview mirror the whole way. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I was certain of two things. I was being followed, and whatever Daniel was involved in was much bigger and more dangerous than I'd imagined. Friday morning, Margaret called with news that made my coffee taste like ashes in my mouth. The marked bills, she said without preamble. My contact says they've already surfaced. I set down my cup carefully. Where? A raid last night. Police hit a warehouse operation on the north side of town, the same area Daniel mentioned in that phone call you overheard. Margaret's voice was grim. They found some of your bills in a money counting machine, mixed in with about $200,000 in cash. So they have proof. They have proof that the money you gave Daniel went directly into a major money laundering operation, the kind that processes cash for drug dealers and other organized crime. She paused. Ruth, The detective I spoke with says they've been watching this operation for months. They're making arrests today. My hands had gone numb. What about me? You're clear. The bank records we set up show the money came from your legitimate accounts, and there's documentation that you were cooperating with the investigation. Another pause. But Ruth, they want to use you to get Daniel to talk. What does that mean? They want you to act normal when he contacts you. Let him think everything is fine until they can arrest him safely. I was still sitting at the kitchen table 2 hours later when my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. The message was short: "Things going bad. We need to talk, now." I stared at those words for a long time before I called Margaret back. "He knows," I said. "How can you tell?" "We need to talk, now." That's not how Daniel asks for anything. That's how someone who's scared out of his mind sounds. Margaret was quiet. Then, "Where does he want to meet?" He didn't say, just said we need to talk now. "Don't respond yet. Let me call my contact first." 20 minutes later, Margaret called back. "They want you to suggest meeting at Miller's Park, the one downtown with the pavilion. It's public, they can position people around the area. What if he's dangerous now? What if he realizes I'm the one who—" "Ruth." Margaret's voice was steady, calm. "You don't have to do this. But if you don't, he's going to run. And if he runs, he might never face consequences for what he did to you." I thought about all those bank statements, all those forged signatures, all those months of transactions I never authorized. I thought about the way he'd lied to me so easily, the way he'd dismissed my intelligence, the way he'd used me like I was just another tool in his criminal operation. "Tell them I'll do it," I said. I texted Daniel back, "Miller's Park, 1 hour, by the pavilion." His response came immediately, "Okay." As I got dressed, choosing clothes carefully like I was preparing for something important, I wondered if this was what it felt like to be brave. It didn't feel noble or heroic. It felt like putting one foot in front of the other because the alternative was unthinkable. I drove to Miller's Park with my phone recording and a small microphone Margaret's contact had given me tucked under my jacket. The park was busier than usual for a Friday afternoon. Joggers, families with children, people walking dogs. I hoped they were all just ordinary citizens enjoying a nice day. Daniel was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench near the pavilion. He looked terrible, pale, unshaven, wearing the same clothes I'd seen him in yesterday. When he saw me, he stood up quickly, his movements sharp and nervous. "Mom," he said as I approached. "Thank God you're here." For a moment, looking at his face, I almost forgot why I'd come. He looked so much like the little boy who used to climb into my lap when thunderstorms scared him. But then I remembered the warehouse raid, the marked bills, the months of lies. "What's wrong, Daniel?" I asked, sitting down on the bench. He sat beside me, close enough that I could smell his fear, sweat, and desperation, and something metallic like blood, though I didn't see any wounds. "Everything's falling apart," he said. "The business, the people I work with, it's all going to hell." "What people?" "You don't understand. These aren't good people, Mom. And now they think someone's been talking to the police?" A chill went through me. "What makes them think that?" Daniel turned to look at me directly, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not just fear, suspicion. "That money you gave me," he said, "it was marked?" The words hung between us like a blade. Around us the park continued its normal Friday afternoon rhythm. Children on swings, a couple walking their dog, teenagers playing frisbee. All of it felt impossibly distant. "Marked?" I kept my voice steady, though my heart was hammering. "What do you mean?" "Serial numbers tracked by the FBI. Daniel's eyes never left my face. The kind of bills they use in sting operations. I looked back at him with what I hoped was confusion rather than terror. "I don't understand. I got that money from my savings account." "Did you?" His voice had gone cold in a way I'd never heard before. "Or did someone help you get it? Someone who wanted to know where it would end up?" A jogger passed behind our bench, earbuds in, focused on his run. I wondered if he was one of the police officers Margaret had mentioned, or just a man trying to stay in shape. Daniel, you're scaring me. What are you talking about? For a moment, something flickered across his face, maybe doubt, maybe the last remnant of the son who used to trust me completely. Then it was gone. The people I work with don't believe in coincidences, Mom. When marked bills show up in their operation the same week someone gets arrested, they start asking questions. Someone got arrested? 3 someones, including the guy who runs the warehouse. Daniel leaned closer, and I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the fear that had been eating at him. They think there's an informant, someone on the inside feeding information to the cops. My throat felt dry. And they think it's you? They think it's someone who had access to clean money, someone who could introduce marked bills without raising suspicion. His hand moved to rest on my arm, the same gentle gesture he'd used since childhood, but now it felt like a warning. Someone like a sweet old lady who everyone trusts. The frisbee game continued behind us. A child laughed on the swings. Normal sounds in a world that had suddenly become very abnormal. Daniel, I said quietly, I gave you that money because I love you. Because I wanted to help. I know. His voice cracked slightly. That's what makes this so messed up. I'd never heard him sound so bitter before. The anger was new, raw. What are you going to do? I asked. Before he could answer, I saw movement in my peripheral vision. 2 men in casual clothes walking toward us from different directions, moving with the kind of purposeful coordination that meant they weren't just park visitors. Daniel saw them too. His hand tightened on my arm, not painful but firm enough to make his point. Mom, he said, his voice suddenly urgent, when they ask you questions you don't know anything about my business. You gave me money because you're a generous mother, nothing more. Can you do that for me? The men were closer now. One of them spoke into what looked like a cell phone, but his eyes were fixed on our bench. Daniel, can you do that for me? His grip was tighter now, and I could see panic rising in his face. Please, these people, if they think you're involved. The first man reached us before I could answer. Daniel Morrison? Daniel's hand dropped from my arm. He looked at me for one last moment, and I saw something break in his expression. The final realization that the person he'd trusted most in the world was the person who'd brought this moment to him. Yes, he said quietly. You're under arrest. The officer was already reaching for his handcuffs, while his partner positioned himself between Daniel and me. You have the right to remain silent. I watched them cuff my son, this man I'd raised from a helpless infant, and felt nothing but an enormous emptiness where all that maternal love used to live. As they led him toward a waiting car, Daniel turned back once. Mom? I met his eyes and said the only thing that felt true. I told you I'd always help you, Daniel. I just never said how. The understanding that crossed his face was terrible to see. But I didn't look away. After the police car disappeared, I sat on the bench for a long time, watching the ordinary people in the park live their ordinary lives. Eventually, one of the officers approached and told me I could go home. Home, where I would close the banking app on my phone, delete Daniel's access to my accounts, and make myself a cup of tea in the kitchen where this had all started days ago. Some stories don't have happy endings. Some stories just have necessary ones. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, those turn out to be the same thing. So, that's my story. I'd love to hear what you think. Was I right to turn in my own son? Or should a mother always protect her child no matter what they've done? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more stories like mine.